To many residents of Marin County, California, there is nothing special about this field. Located in between a juvenile hall, a senior home, and a park ranger office, it appears wholly ordinary. But for a select few, this quiet patch of land contains a secret history. Beneath its soil and marked only by numbered bronze tiles, more than 280 recorded people remain buried without recognition in what was once a functioning graveyard. Over a century of both tragic misfortunes and acts of humanity contribute to what has become, until now, a silent legacy.
I'm Mike Warner. I'm an open space park ranger with Marin County Parks. We manage 16,000 acres of open space throughout Marin County. My background is in historical geography, and I've worked on many different historical research projects throughout the county. I had heard stories from the other rangers here about the site and started doing some research on my own and collecting the information that we had here. There's no real information out on the internet that's easily available to find about the site.
While the Marin County Cemetery was officially established in 1893, no one knows exactly when the first burial occurred here. Many experts believe this site was used for burials long before it was officially deemed a cemetery.
The best record we have, and that was provided by the Marin County Library, is about 285 people are buried in the graveyard, but that record starts in about 1924. I've heard estimates as high as 1,500, but given the size of the land there, I would tend to think that it's closer to 285.
We have some primary source documentation on the cemetery. Things get deposited here in this collection, and they have been for decades. My name is Carol Acquaviva, and I'm a librarian and the digital archivist here in the Ann T. Kent, California room, which is a special collection of Marin County's history. People who were buried at the cemetery would have been buried there because they didn't leave behind provisions for burials, or they didn't have relatives or friends or next of kin to pay for burial. If a death occurred in the county, let's say a body washed up on shore and there was no identification, that would be someone who would probably be buried at the poor farm. So poor farms go all the way back to medieval Europe. The population ranged from newborn babies to the elderly and everything in between. Society felt like, these people are a bother to see on the streets, to make some kind of provision for them. So in 1880, the Board of Supervisors decided that this was something that was necessary, so they passed a resolution establishing the county poor farm.
The farm was more so for self-production of food for the people that were dependent on the farm. The products were dairy mainly, and then also vegetables. It was a site for basically indebted folks, so if you owed money and you couldn't pay it.
Residents of the Marin County Poor Farm were often referred to at the time as inmates, but the word's meaning differs from what one might think of today.
Today, we would call them residents or patients, but back then, inmates was the term that they used, which is unfortunate because we think prisoner when we hear inmate, and that implies that these people have done something bad or they're a danger to society, and that really, wasn't the case. It was more of a term of circumstance or condition, but it does say something about how our society treats people who are poor as if it's their fault. This is before kind of structural welfare and before a lot of kind of social consciousness of what to do with people who were struck by poverty. Inmates were free to leave, so it really wasn't a prison. In fact, I see it in the records that a lot of times someone would leave and then come back like a couple months later and then leave and then come back. It probably depends on their, what their life situation was.
By the turn of the century, the farm was not only operational, but also well kept. Several county articles from the period note the comfortable bedrooms and filling meals that the farm had to offer. However, this isn't to say that the establishment didn't have its rough patches. In 1911, the poor farm caught fire and burned to ashes. The establishment was rebuilt 2 years later, but even then, issues eventually arose.
In about the mid-1950s, the facility itself, the buildings were deemed unsafe and not earthquake safe. And it would have been a tremendous expense for the county to rebuild or retrofit.
But the end of the farm did not mark the end of the graveyard's operations. Many of the deceased were of the local county hospital, which ran from 1932 to 1963. Similar to the graveyard and the poor farm, the Marin County Hospital was designed to take in residential patients struck with poverty. Some were afflicted with mental illnesses or incurable diseases such as tuberculosis.
To be eligible to be what they call committed to the hospital, you would either be your doctor that would sign a notice and have you sent to the hospital here in Lucas Valley, or it would be actually a county board of supervisor had the power at the time to commit somebody. At its height, there was about 40 patients in the hospital, and there's 24 nurses that were on staff to take care of the patients. The nurses lived in a dormitory, which actually was a former, what they called a pest house from back in the days of the original farm buildings. And the pest house was somewhere that if you had a disease that couldn't be cured, you would be housed in the pest house at the farm instead of with the general population, the rest of the people that lived at the farm. The hospital was shut down in 1963. The building was no longer up to current seismic code. The conditions were deteriorating and they didn't have enough money to upgrade the facility. The dormitory for the nurses is actually one of the few remaining buildings that is left from the hospital.
Today, it acts as storage space for the county's education records. The farm, hospital, and graveyard were often interconnected and constantly interacting with one another. The poor farm often supplied the county hospital with its produce, and the graveyard was used to bury inmates from both complexes. But these simple panels conceal a plethora of stories. For instance, grave 235. Indistinguishable from the rest, this grave holds the body of Marin Buddy Thompson, an inmate from Alcatraz prison in the 1940s.
He was a bank robber from Texas who eventually ended up being incarcerated at Alcatraz. During his time there, he and several other inmates orchestrated the breakout at Alcatraz, also known as the Battle of Alcatraz.
My name is Jolene Babiak. I lived on Alcatraz as a child when I was 7 to 9 and also when I was 15. My father worked there for 9 years. I think Thompson thought he got a raw deal. He always thought he got a raw deal. That's the story he told. But he did. I mean, his mother died, and then a year later, his father said, "Get lost. You're on your own." It's 10. So he comes out to Alcatraz in October of 1945, which means he's a new guy. Within 6 months, he was involved with Coy, Kretzer, and the others in the Battle of 46.
He and another inmate were convicted after the fact for the murder of a couple of the prison guards at Alcatraz. He was put to death at San Quentin prison in a gas chamber.
Hell, I'm not afraid to die. If I was, I wouldn't be in this racket. These were Thompson's last words.
Afterwards, his family didn't want to claim his body. His body was handed over to the county for disposal, and they buried him here at the county farm in grave 235. I've heard of a few people going out to the graveyard and looking for ghosts or trying to experience some sort of spiritual experience. And even so, here, since our office is right across the street, I've heard from coworkers who have had weird instances or seen weird things that have happened here. The only experience I've really had here once was coming here very early in the morning, probably about 6 in the morning, and going out to one of our garages and hearing someone walking around in one of the lofts. It was a very interesting experience. I could hear someone clearly walking up steps and up to the loft, but I didn't see them. Definitely an unexplainable instance that I'll always remember. Right now, the burial grounds are actually owned by our landscape department for Marin County Park, so it's a different division. It's not necessarily the open space, but it's managed quite like an open space now. It's kind of left in its natural condition. There's no signs or facilities to mark that it is an actual graveyard.
My name is Ron Marinoff. I'm a 53-year resident of Upper Lucas Valley in Marin County. I moved here in 1963, and I bought one of the first Eichler homes in Upper Lucas Valley. We became aware from some people at the county that there was a burial ground. We tried to get Marin County to at least put up like a split rail fence around it to show a little reverence that people were buried there. But we got no interest at all from county government, so there still is no delineation of any kind of where it starts and where it stops. I think in a way it's disrespectful. There should be more reverence for people who die in that condition.
And in later decades, the cemetery was overgrown. It didn't get as much care as maybe it deserved just because of lack of funding and things like that. It would be a good thing to recognize the people that are buried there, to kind of give dignity to them.
Last October, you just started seeing signage for come to Parks and Rec's spooky Halloween hike. And at a certain point, one of the rangers came out and started talking about, a lot of people don't know this, but you are actually at a gravesite. And so we're looking around like, where's the gravesite?
As I understand it, I'm not sure exactly where it is, but I believe I'm one of the closest homeowners because I live towards the edge of the Lucas Valley.
It's kind of weird to think about that there's just like 200 plus people buried out there, especially since I used to ride my bike past it every day.
Usually when there's a graveyard, it's a big deal. There's a fence around it. And people know, oh, that's a graveyard, that's a place that you should be when you're there, you're a little bit quieter.
I think it would make a lot of sense and would be kind to people's memories if there was some acknowledgement that they existed, if there was some arrangement whereby the area could be marked off, and indeed that people's names could be shown, because those people were as important as we are, and why should they not be acknowledged?
I am shocked that nothing has been done specifically regarding environmental concerns. A fence is not that invasive. A sign especially is not that invasive.
And you see it with trails all the time, right? I mean, I think we got a few trails over in Lucas Valley Estates that have been updated with signs. If your taxpayer dollars have just allowed us to open up this trail.
I definitely think that people have the right to be remembered, especially if they have loved ones who don't know where they're buried.
It's really up to us presently on our own independent free will to interpret what that person's existence means to us.
Eventually what happens if you don't connect people to their history, that history will be forgotten. Without that site to kind of memorialize it, all that really stands is basically us in this room knowing about it and the documents that we have. There's people buried from all walks of life in the graveyard. You know, those are people's sons and daughters and parents and grandparents, you know, or cousins, brothers, sisters, things like that out there.